Hello, my name is Marlene Quinn, and I am a member of the Immigrant Justice Committee of Newcastle Presbytery. The following PowerPoint was created by a subgroup of our committee. Thank you to Marty Yates and Alice Davis of Hanover Presbyterian Church, Marge Johnson of Concord Presbyterian Church, and Chirito Cavacci Mateko, who wears many hats, including co-chair of the Delaware Hispanic Commission, chair of the Hispanic Month Committee, and is a member of the Delaware Heritage Commission, and even more. We're grateful she could share her expertise with us. This presentation is focusing on our neighbors to the south. We hope to bring you some new information, raise some questions in your mind, or maybe give you some ideas to use with your group or congregation. Do we have all the answers? Absolutely not. But perhaps we can help you imagine ways you or your congregation might want to be involved. Let's start by separating fact from fiction. The divisiveness in our country is causing people pain in other countries. This is especially true for people seeking asylum at our southern border. What are some of the facts versus myths that confuse the issue? Exactly who is coming across our border? Where are they from? Now, I realize this is a very busy slide and certainly too small for you to read, but it shows the history of the Central American region and the years of U.S. government and corporate interference. There is plenty of blame to go around. No matter what political party is in power, be it as president or as a majority in Congress, our policies have not been beneficial to the affected countries, nor has anyone so far been able to come up with a helpful plan moving forward. Immigration continues to be an issue in Congress and in our state legislatures as the immigrants continue to fuel our economy. Focusing on Guatemala, by 1953, the American company United Fruit owned 75% of the workable land. A CIA-backed coup deposed elected President Arbenz in 1954. The war that ensued lasted for more than 60 years. Its effects are still felt today. 84% of the rural population is either landless or near landless. Only 2.5% of the landowners own 2/3 of the land. I was there a couple of times in the 90s, in 2005, and again a few years later. Each time, conditions had gotten worse. Looking at El Salvador, the history of violence there was promulgated by the U.S. involvement. Consequently, there was civil war and the rise of gangs. 75,000 people were killed and over 1 million were displaced. The United States supported the right-wing government. U.S. trained elite military units, provided weapons, helicopters, and $4 billion in U.S. aid through the 1980s. Human rights violations and murders were common occurrences, including those of Archbishop Oscar Romero, the 4 nuns, and the 6 Jesuits, and there were many people who simply disappeared. The Civil War lasted from 1980 to 1992, there is a long-term influence of violence on children, as well as rampant proliferation and availability of guns. The Civil War violence spurred migration to the U.S. Gangs were also created here. The U.S. ordered mass deportation of gang members back to El Salvador in 1996. The United Nations designated El Salvador as the deadliest country in the world outside of a war zone in 2015. 40% of immigrants from Central America left home after experiencing violence from gangs. Gang influence continues to increase. In 2020, homicides decreased, but is still the highest rate in Latin America. Rapes increased 31% from 2017 to 2019. 94% of El Salvador is overrun by gangs, making it unsafe for citizens to relocate within their own country. Moving on to Honduras. In the late 19th century, Honduras granted land to several U.S.-based fruit companies and substantial exemptions to American infrastructure companies. During the 1980s, we also established a continuing military presence in order to support the Contra War in El Salvador and Nicaragua, while also developing an airstrip and modern port in Honduras. A U.S.-backed coup in 2009 ousted President Zozea, resulting in increased violence and an economic collapse. The poorest 10% of the population receives just 1.2% of the country's wealth, while the richest 10% collect 42%. Reflecting the increased violence, a woman is killed every 23 hours on average. Currently, the United States' involvement in this region has destabilized the countries politically, economically, and socially, resulting in the following reasons for migration. So why do some of these people come to the United States? Some reasons include impoverishment, family reunification, violence, crime in their country, climate change affecting what they can produce, and continued government corruption by U.S. financial interests. Now listen to Araceli, a woman from Guatemala.
Tengo 4 niños y quizás si yo no hubiera migrado a este país, mis niños no tuvieran oportunidades como ahora sí lo tienen, porque yo como no tuve oportunidades, no tuve una educación alta por falta de oportunidades, porque mi historia fue triste en mi niñez. A mi papá lo asesinaron cuando yo tenía 3 años en la guerra de los 80. Entonces prácticamente yo no tuve padre y por esa misma razón yo no tuve oportunidades para sobresalir en la vida. Pero bueno, al yo llegar en este país, pues tuve a mis hijos y siempre traía un sueño de tener un mejor futuro o seguir adelante, y porque no quería ver a mis hijos sufrir como yo crecí, como yo
Let's look more closely at some of the myths about immigrants who come from these Central American countries and Mexico. Myth number 1, they take our jobs. In reality, there's no such thing as an American job. Corporations will move jobs wherever they need to go to get cheap labor. Corporations want vulnerable, unprotected laborers who they can pay the lowest wage possible. Since the 1940s, the U.S. government has collaborated with businesses to recreate high-profit systems that were being undermined in this country by factory workers fighting for rights. Agreements negotiated by the U.S. government on behalf of U.S. corporations include Operation Bootstrap, in which the U.S. provided incentives to relocate labor-intensive jobs to Puerto Rico. The Border Industrialization Program in 1965, in which U.S. businesses relocated to tariff-free zones in Mexican towns. The maquiladora factories in Mexico are run by a foreign company, and then the products are exported back to the home country of that company. Besides low wages, there are fewer environmental laws and concerns for workers' safety. I was in a maquiladora run by Foster Grant. The workers who were spray painting the glasses frames had neither eye protection nor any type of protection from the paint fumes. At one time, all Sears garage door openers and extension cords were made in such effect. And then we had NAFTA in 1994, which produced a wholesale move by U.S. industries in search of lower wages. Today, 70% of Fortune 500 companies with labor-intensive production have taken their jobs overseas. In the interest of higher profits, U.S. corporations refuse to provide livable salaries and humane working conditions. American workers refuse to work in substandard conditions, so desperate immigrants fill the void. I live in Sussex County, Delaware, and the poultry processing plants are an excellent example of this. Jobs are created in response to increased consumer demand. Increased immigration creates more consumers. As more consumer goods are needed, more jobs are created. Myth number 2, undocumented immigrants don't pay taxes. In actuality, no one gets a free ride. Even undocumented immigrants pay sales, gas, and property taxes. In 2018 in Delaware, it's estimated that undocumented immigrants paid $23.9 million in state and local taxes, and that the DACA recipients paid $2.2 million. They also pay into Social Security and Medicare. According to the Congressional Budget Office, in 2016, 50 to 75% of undocumented workers have false papers, meaning they are paying payroll taxes, which include Social Security and Medicare. Undocumented workers paid $13 billion to Social Security and $3 billion to Medicare. But because they are undocumented, they will never receive Social Security payments or Medicare benefits. Undocumented immigrants actually pay a higher state and local tax rate than the richest 1%. Myth number 3, undocumented immigrants are a drain on the economy. In fact, they do pay Social Security and cannot receive payments. They cannot use federal assistance programs. They use schools and the EMS, but they support these programs through sales and property tax. The only service used more by immigrants than by citizens is food assistance, and that's usually for their children, who are often U.S. citizens. They use emergency rooms and Medicaid for acute, not chronic, health issues. Myth number 4. They should follow the same immigration rules as everyone else. This is actually an inaccurate comparison. Historically, European whites are given preference and easier entrance. Strict immigration laws have restricted entrance of Asians, Eastern Europeans, and Hispanics. The reasons for immigration are different from before 1965. The 1965 law increased diversity, but it created a legal versus illegal dichotomy. People are coming due to political upheaval, wars, gang violence, climate change, and loss of land due to corporate greed. Obstacles include a very complicated process. There is a lack of access to consulates and racial profiling groups. Immigrants are required to present proof of income, sponsorship, and employment. Very few people fleeing poverty and violence in a poor country can meet these requirements. Currently, a person from Mexico has a 20-year wait for a visa to be granted. The majority of undocumented immigrants, about 65%, are here because they have overstayed their visas. The right to seek asylum is legal, but it is even more complicated. Asylum seekers must be in the U.S. or at a port of entry such as an airport or an official land crossing in order to request asylum. You cannot seek asylum in advance of arriving in our country. Asylum is a form of protection which allows an individual to remain in the U.S. instead of being deported to a country where he or she fears persecution or harm. Under U.S. law, people who flee their country because they fear persecution can apply for asylum, but it's not always easy to prove. We need our immigrants. Immigration fuels our economy and raises the GDP. Immigration surplus is the net increase in the national income of the country that occurs as a result of immigration that benefits all residents of that country. Immigrants improve the allocation of resources in an economy as immigrants move where the jobs are. Our aging population needs an infusion of immigrants. Through their taxes, immigrants support our aging population. In 2016, there were 4.7 working age adults for every person over 65. By 2035, the Census Bureau projects there will be only 2.4 working age adults for every person over 65. Children born to immigrants are upwardly mobile. Now listen to Ronnie Baltazar.
He sido admirado por mis padres porque ellos vinieron aquí con una meta de mejorarse a ellos mismos, ¿verdad? Si ellos no tuvieron miedo a venir a un país sin hablar el inglés, sin tener ningún familiar aquí, ¿qué me impedía a mí hacer lo mismo en mi trabajo profesional? Ha sido un poco difícil, ha sido intimidante postularme en una posición donde no hay gente como nosotros en estas posiciones. pero lo vuelvo a repetir, que siempre tiene que haber alguien que lo tiene que ser, alguien que sea el primero. Y lo que siempre yo he dicho es que aunque yo tal vez sea el primero en algunas cosas, nunca quiero ser el último, porque hay que tener que abrir esa puerta y dejarla abierta para que otros sigan. Lo que me ha ayudado mucho también es que mis estudios, la educación pública y también la universidad, mi experiencias en el trabajo, tener esa experiencia política, esa experiencia legislativa, me ha ayudado bastante porque he podido yo asimilarme muy bien en estos trabajos, especialmente en la junta escolar, donde todo lo que hacemos es casi de dinero o financieramente o legislativa. Entonces eso me ha ayudado mucho.
Immigrants fill constantly high employer demand for low-skilled jobs in our agriculture, poultry, meat processing, hospitality, and construction sectors. Granting citizenship for undocumented people will boost our GDP by $1.7 trillion over 10 years and create more than 400,000 jobs. Hear what Arturo has to say.
Así, ella le está echando muchas ganas y pues yo también estoy echándole ganas aquí para que ella salga adelante y tal parece que sí, nuestro sueño, primero Dios, se va a hacer realidad de trabajar en equipo. Ya le faltan un año más de la carrera más su maestría, que es un año más, serían 2 años.
Qué impresionante.
Esos son los planes, pero pues a uno como no tiene documentos, sí tiene uno un poco de limitaciones, porque el gobierno a una persona que no tiene documentos no le da un número, te deja registrar una compañía, pero cuando tú necesitas comprar un camión para transportar cosas más pesadas, necesitas un número que se llama USDOT, un número de identificación del vehículo de transportación.
Sí.
Y si tú no tienes documentos, no lo puedes sacar. Necesitas ser una persona que sea ciudadana americana. Y entonces eso te limita porque tú tienes que moverte en un perfil bajo con camiones más chiquitos, con equipo más pequeño. Entonces, cuando mi hija venga y tome un porcentaje de la compañía, ella va a poder llevar a esta compañía a un nivel más grande.
So, what kinds of moral dilemmas face us? Immigration laws do not reflect our Christian values. Social constructs like borders should not outweigh humanitarian values. The U.S. government destabilized the region, leading to intolerable conditions for the population. We do have accountability. People who are deported often are returned to a country other than their country of origin, and they have no resources. So what is to become of them and their families? Central American immigrants who are deported back to Mexico as a result of U.S. immigration policy now provide a significant new source of desperate, vulnerable workers forced to work for low wages. What is our responsibility? Here are a few suggestions of things we can all do. Continue support for the DACA students at Delaware State University and at the University of Delaware. Advocate with your senators and congressional representatives to develop a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented immigrants. Stay informed about these issues. Provide educational opportunities for your congregation, such as this PowerPoint. Listen to and support Entre Nosotros Radio, which helps in building, supporting, and informing the Latinx Hispanic community, as well as the non-Hispanic community. Newcastle Presbytery is helping with this thanks to an Ignite grant that was received by our Immigrant Justice Committee. We have joined with other organizations to have these programs translated into English. There are more details on our Presbytery website, but the people that you heard sharing bits of their stories today are excerpts from that radio program. You are encouraged to listen every Thursday from 11:30 to noon at 93.9 FM, or watch the YouTube recordings. Charito is one of the facilitators. She's the woman on your left. What would you do if you were in their shoes, as Jesus, Mary, and Joseph were? Our presbytery voted to become a Matthew 25 presbytery. So let me close by reading the familiar passage from Matthew 25, verses 35 to 40. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly, I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." The word of the Lord.